Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Tara Feiner and I am the Director of Jewish Family Services. On behalf of our program committee, co-chaired by the Marianne Bernstein and the Helene Gordon, who are on with us today, and on behalf of the JFS Advisory Board, chaired by Michelle Dritz, welcome to Is the Vaccine a Panacea and What Should We Expect? This is a very timely topic and presentation as more and more of us are either vaccinated or on the path to vaccination, and we are starting to come out of our homes more and out of isolation more in baby steps. This is a really important topic to understand what the vaccine means and where things might be going. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Jack Bernstein with us today. But before I do the introductions officially, I do want to do some housekeeping. As always, we always do a reminder that this is an educational resource and not individual medical recommendations for any one particular person. We do resource programming. And then we want to make sure everybody knows how to work their Zoom controls. So while your mics might be live now, we will be muting you if you do not mute yourselves as we go. The way you know whether or not you're muted is on the bottom left of your screen, or in your square, you might see 3 dots. When you see the little microphone with green, your mic is live. I'm gonna keep moving my lips and keep talking, but I'm gonna click my microphone. My lips were moving, but you didn't hear a thing because I had a line through my microphone, it was red. Same thing with your camera. Whether or not we can see you is entirely up to you and is in your control. There's a little camera on the bottom left. Some tablets have it at the top. Or you can control it from within your square where you see yourself, and you can stop your video. If your video icon is white, you are a live video. And if it has a line through it, you can still hear me, but you can't see me because there's a line through it. You know that my video is off. So that is completely up to you. We will mute you if there's some breakthrough sound. It's really important that everybody is muted except for our presenter, because we want everyone to have the best possible experience. If you're not muted, there's a lot of background sound. We can hear talking, we can hear dogs barking, doorbells, and so on. And we want everyone to be able to hear our presenter. So if you're having trouble with your mute function, we might mute you during the course of the presentation. We are going to hold all questions till the end. But if you're afraid that you're going to forget your question, you can put it in the chat box and then we'll get to it at the end of the session, or you can just ask at the end. So at the bottom of your screen, there is a little chat function that looks like a little thought bubble. So if you click that, that's where you type, and you just have to make sure that you hit enter afterwards, and it should go to everyone so that we see your question.
I think
so. We can just do a little test. If you see your little thought bubble, the chat, you can type yes, and
okay, mine's off. What?
You can do that.
Better mute.
All right. So a little yes lets us know that you have found your chat function and you know how to use it. Perfect. We're seeing that come through. And then throughout the course of the presentation, you can react to the presenter. And there is a reactions button. It looks like a little smiley face. It says reactions underneath with a little plus sign. And when you click that, you have options such as clapping your hands or thumbs up or laughing. So you have, at the end when we get to questions, you can also do a raising of your hand. The icons will disappear on their own after a couple seconds. There you go, just disappeared. We just have to lower hands. So you have that. When you're watching a presentation, you have 2 options of gallery view or speaker view. That toggle is typically at the top of your screen with the word view. And you can click side-by-side speaker, which puts the speaker next to the PowerPoint, or side-by-side gallery. And how many people and screens you see depends on your device and your screen size and capacity. So you have that option, but we do recommend the speaker view. And that is about it for housekeeping. So you've heard enough from me. I am going to introduce our speaker so we can actually get the session started. So I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Jack Bernstein. Dr. Bernstein is an infectious disease physician. He was formerly the chief of infectious disease and head of research at the Dayton Veterans Affairs Medical Center. And he is also an emeritus professor at Wright State University's Boonshoft School of Medicine. I would like to add that he's an incredible photographer, has some fascinating hobbies, is an all-around great guy, and is a fantastic presenter. If you have not heard him present in the past, you are really in for a treat. He breaks down complex information into understandable bits that really makes things come to light, and you have little aha moments and gives you a lot to think about. So we are privileged and thrilled to have Dr. Bernstein with us today. And with that, I pass the mic.
Thank you, Tara. And since I noticed some other people on here, I just want to acknowledge that I went to the City University of New York at Stony Brook, and there are 3 Stony Brook alumni on this Zoom call, which is a different type of thing. So, okay, starting off this slide, actually the pictures on this slide were used on November 20th of last year when I gave another presentation. And that was at the beginning, pretty much. We were early on, we had no understanding, we had no vaccines, we had no antivirals. We were all stumbling insofar as how to diagnose, how to treat this virus infection. And at this point in time, we've come a phenomenal way along since then. Okay, let's see if this works. There we go. This is showing you on November 20th, when I gave my last presentation, the average daily cases per 100,000 in that week. And as we can see, maroon is not a good color. And this is before the big Florida outbreak. You can see that the Midwest is heavily affected. The Dayton area, the Toledo area, Western Ohio was heavily affected. And this got worse. So this is looking at new reported cases by day. And again, this is, I don't know why I did that. This is last year. When we came, Marianne and my wife and I were in Vietnam when this started, and that was in February of last year. And at that point, we were trying to keep the so-called China virus out, and Vietnam essentially shut its borders. As we left Vietnam in late February, we were on one of the last flights out of Saigon. The Korean Airlines airplane that we flew out on came in empty just to take people back because they would not let people in from Korea. That was just the beginning. As you see here in this country, after that portion in late March, it started picking up, and we thought it was bad in April. But by July, getting up to 50,000 cases a day. And then you can see by late November, we had our so-called third peak. You know, this is like a mountain range. These aren't isolated mountains. We never had a trough where we went to zero. With influenza, what we usually see is we see a big influenza outbreak during the winter, and then it's gone during the summer. This virus has never been seen before by people. And so what happened is that we continued to have transmission from person to person. With restrictions, we had the amount of virus drop, but then it came back again. And whether these increases were related to the restrictions placed in certain cities or states or not is still a little bit unclear. But as we got to late December, it was god awful. And you can see here deaths per day, over 2,000 deaths per day in mid-April. And then as we got to winter, it was just about the same. In Dayton, the hospitals were essentially filling up. The ICUs were full. I know that at Kettering Hospital, they had 3 or 4 wards dedicated to COVID patients, pretty much the same at Miami Valley. And what they did with the feeder hospitals, such as Grandview, is they would send their patients to the mothership where they would be put in the ICUs. We tried to keep the people off of ventilators because if they got on a ventilator, they frequently did not get off. And we absolutely had deaths, including one pulmonologist at Miami Valley who was waiting for a lung transplant and then died. This is a continuing problem. Now, this illustration is from the New York Times, and it's showing you again last September, where it was spreading rapidly. The intensity we saw around Christmas, where pretty much the entire country had heavy COVID activity, and then to right now, which is May. And even though you see Michigan looks bad, it's been dropping week by week. So it's getting better. And again, that's the same graph. And Hawaii has had the most severe restrictions To get into Hawaii, you need to have a negative PCR test. That's the nucleic acid test that you use to detect the presence of the virus's RNA, the nucleic acid, the genetic material. And Hawaii insisted on a negative PCR by a laboratory that was approved by the state of Hawaii. And around here, there aren't very many. I think Walgreens was approved, but then you needed it within so many hours. There was no guarantee you were going to get the result back in that many hours. Alaska, again, is very spread out, moderate COVID. And we can see in Florida, there is still moderate amount of COVID. New York City is really not doing too bad right now. So where we are now is, and again, I updated this a couple of days ago, the December, January peak, and now we seem to be heading downwards. But this is a combination of the amount of people that have been infected. We have not yet reached so-called herd immunity. And there have been several commentaries recently that we very well may never reach herd immunity because of vaccine resistance in some parts of the country. In any case, the hospitals now in Dayton, there are not that many patients with COVID in the intensive care units. And I'm sorry about that. And things are dropping, as you see over here, the 14-day change down 30% right now. And it's looking like it might be a good summer, maybe. The fact that we're having a reasonable experience in this country at this time probably is related to both good preventive measures, mask wearing, in my experience, in places where it matters, does occur. I've not gone to any football or baseball games to see them wearing no masks in the stadium, but I have gone to lots of restaurants where the majority of the servers have been wearing masks and the tables have been spread apart. The other thing is the fact that the vaccine has been out for a while now. Marianne and I, my wife and I, were both on the Pfizer trial. So she's been vaccinated since last September. Since I got the placebo, I got the vaccine in late December when they unblinded me and told me you're now eligible for the vaccine. So I've been vaccinated for roughly 5 months. She's been vaccinated for roughly 8 months. But as this goes on in the entire population, including in the older population, I think we're going to see it dropping in our country. Vaccine usage and availability outside of the US is not nearly as good as it is here. And there have been multiple controversies, and I'll call them crises in Europe, where there have been some vaccines associated with side effects such as blood clots. There's been a lack of availability of vaccines, and so the percentage of their population is really relatively low. The place where the major tragedy is going on right now is India. For some reason, India was avoiding a major COVID outbreak until recently, and now people are dying because there's no oxygen. And it's just craziness. They don't get into the hospital, they stay home, they can't get supplemental oxygen, and they die because they can't breathe. And so, whereas we're seeing our curve decreasing, the worldwide curve is still very high, and many countries are really badly affected. This is showing you a map of the world as of, again, looking at my watch, 3 days ago. And we can see that India, which has a population of well over 1 billion, is heavily affected. We can see that South America, Argentina is heavily affected, and even worse for some reason is Uruguay over here. Brazil, which has had a political situation where the president of Brazil has poo-pooed the vaccine and advocated for alternative treatments, which have been discredited. They are having tremendous problems with COVID in Brazil. And you can see Colombia also. Mexico is not too bad right now. Central America, except for Costa Rica, isn't too bad. But again, the two places where I'd be worried about are South Asia and here. Of interest, the Maldives insisted on a negative PCR 96 hours before I got there, before I departed, excuse me. when I was there last month. And now you're suddenly seeing an increase in COVID in the Maldives. And the Maldives is an archipelago of a bunch of coral atolls. It's really hard to get from island to island. And I think what you're seeing now is the Maldives are very close to India. And so you're getting spillover from India into the Maldives. And again, when it's on an island, it can be devastating because there's no place to go. Sweden had the most lax restrictions during the pandemic. And as we can see here, it's perhaps reaping the price of what's gone on there. When I talked last year and when we were looking at November, there were dozens and dozens of vaccines in development. And there were many different types of vaccines. The first one is the so-called protein-based. This is like your flu shot. They grow the virus, they take out the surface proteins, which are the membrane and the things that stick to your cells, and they inject that. And so there were 27 of those in development last November. The nucleic acid vaccines are the ones where they inject you with a little bit of messenger RNA. That's what makes proteins in our cells, in a way that our muscles make the virus proteins and we get immune that way. The viral vector vaccines are like there's an adenovirus one where they take a virus that won't make you sick and they put the genetic material for COVID into it and inject you, and that does it. Live virus vaccines haven't gone very far. This would be attenuated where they try to make it weaker, and then various other methods too. So that was, again, last year in November, nothing was approved. When we look at 4 days ago, there are 8 vaccines, and this is worldwide, approved for full use. 4 vaccines were abandoned, another 6 in earlier limited use, and there's still 4,900 and something vaccines that are still in testing right now. The 3 vaccines I've illustrated here with the purple dots are the ones that are approved in this country. And so we'll go over how these work a little bit. The Pfizer, which is the most popular, is an RNA vaccine. The Moderna is also an RNA vaccine. And you can say, in this country, it's not truly approved. It's emergency use. It's not fully approved, but it's in wide use right now. Whoops. The Gamaleya is not in this country. It's a Russian vaccine, and they're trying to push it into lots of other countries. There are some Chinese vaccines also that are out there that are being used in other countries, and they're calling this vaccine diplomacy. How best to get better relations with your country than to give them a vaccine. The Oxford vaccine in England is a chimpanzee adenovirus vaccine, and it's being used, but there were some problems with clotting and availability, and so there are issues with that. And then in this country, again, we have a Johnson & Johnson. So these are mRNA vaccines, these 2. This one is an adenovirus vaccine. Adenovirus is a cold virus. They made a version of the virus that could infect you but not cause you to become sick. They made it a defective virus. And they took the genetic material of adenovirus and inserted the coding for the virus attachment protein. And so when that gets into your cells, it makes the protein, which then makes you immune. This is the first vaccine that was approved, which is the Pfizer vaccine, and ignore all this stuff. The bottom line is they put some messenger RNA, which makes proteins, in a fatty capsule, lipid particle. It's injected into your arm. It fuses with your cell membrane, and once it's inside your cell, the ribosomes, which are our protein-making machinery, take that messenger RNA, make it into a protein, which then gets onto the surface of the cell, and then what you have is your own immune cells recognize this as a foreign antigen, foreign protein, and makes antibodies against it. People were worried because, oh my gosh, we're injecting genetic material. But what people forget is that when the original SARS was out, that was the one that was in Hong Kong and went to Canada and had a high mortality rate. They made this type of vaccine for SARS, but because SARS was contained and petered out, it was never really put into wide use. So this type of technique has been out there for a couple of years, but never used widely. Now, if we look at how well this works, so you need to make the protein on your cells, your body's immune system needs to recognize it, and then you need to develop enough antibodies so that you can protect yourself against the virus. And what we have here is a really interesting thing, which is, my computer has a mind of its own, interesting graph, and that's showing you that the blue bar is people who got placebo, like me, on the Pfizer trial. And the red bar are people who got the vaccine. And if you look over here, they both were getting infected at the same rate for 10 days. And on the 12th day, a miracle occurred. Nobody got infected anymore. So you see how these two lines diverge. That means that even with one shot of the vaccine, you had enough immunity to prevent, pretty much 95% prevent further infection. And this is going out 21 days. And if you look over here, going out 112 days, very, very little breakthrough infection. Again, greater than 95% efficacy in preventing infection. Now, there's been a lot of debate about, well, can you get this vaccine causes you to have antibodies, which prevents you from getting pneumonia and so forth. But gee, we need antibodies against the virus in our noses. And this vaccine does not cause nose antibodies. So could you get infected in your nose and shed virus and then infect someone else? And this was a lot of angst was promoted by this. And the answer is, it doesn't look like very many people are getting asymptomatically infected. It's really protecting us very well. So again, this is the Pfizer vaccine that I'm showing you. The next one is the Moderna vaccine. Now, the difference between these two are, you notice, it's 28 days apart. The Pfizer vaccine is 21 days apart. There is no magic to this. This is how the studies were developed, and this is how they presented it to the FDA for emergency approval. They could have done the Pfizer 28 days apart. It probably would have been exactly the same. They probably could have done the Moderna 21 days apart. It was the same. But because this is how the studies worked, that's why if you go for one, it's 3 weeks apart. If you go for the other one, it's 4 weeks apart. No other difference. And you can see over here the same type of graph. I didn't show you the expanded one, but you're seeing also roughly 95% efficacy of this vaccine. And it holds out to, this is now 4 months on this graph, but there's been more data going out to 6 months, and it looks like it's about the same. So this is really wonderful news. Now, the other thing they're showing you on this little cartoon is side effects. Lots of people are worried about side effects. So having been a guinea pig and being married to another guinea pig, we can talk to you about our side effects. When I got the placebo, nothing happened except I got a poke in my arm. But when I got the real vaccine, my arm hurt for a little bit. When I got my second shot, it hurt for a little bit too. When Marianne got her shot, her arm hurt a moderate amount the first time, and the second time her arm blew up, her armpit hurt, she had a rash, and she felt crappy for a day. She had no fever, she had no chills, she had nothing like that. Other people have had side effects that are a bit more vigorous, where they feel fluey for a day or two, maybe a couple of days, but it goes away and that's it. This reflects the immune response that you're developing against this vaccine. And an interesting thing, which I'll show you a bit later, is women tend to have more vigorous immune responses than men do against the vaccine. So they tend to have more side effects against it, but the side effects go away. None of them are long-term problematic. And again, I'm not speaking about the 1 in a million blood clot side effect that's been seen. Now, this is the, don't try to memorize this. Again, this is the adenovirus vaccine, which is the Johnson & Johnson. And where it's different is they put the genetic material inside the virus, but because it's a DNA virus, DNA can't be just transcribed or made into protein by your ribosomes without it going into the center of the cell where the protein is made into RNA, and then it goes. So it's a 2 or 3 step process as opposed to a 1 or 2 step process with the other vaccine. Roughly the same. The other problem that you could get into with this vaccine is, since we're giving it to you with a virus, once I give you this virus once, your body's going to be immune to that virus delivery vehicle, and it may not work if we want to use it again. In the case of the mRNA vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, we could give that to you with different formulations time and time again without you being immune to it, decreasing the efficacy and efficiency of the vaccine. In the case of the adenovirus vaccine, you can't quite do that. But again, and this is showing you that not only are you making antibodies, but you're also making your T cells, your immune cells also work against virally infected cells. So where we are as of today in this country is we have 3 vaccines that are in widespread use. And this statement I completely concur with, which is the best vaccine is the one you can get. The side effects are not dramatically different. The efficacy is not dramatically different between them. They will probably all prevent you from being hospitalized and dying, which is what we care about. And with a Pfizer, which was just approved for teenagers, 12 to 15, yesterday. It was previously approved for 16 years and older, so 2 shots, 21 days apart. Now, some people would say to me, okay, you have pretty good immunity after 1 shot. Why not just get 1 shot? Well, when I give you the second shot, your immunity goes up 5-fold, and it's going to last a lot longer. So those people that I said that are protected for 6 months from disease are people who've gotten 2 shots. We do not know how long protection would be if you only got 1 shot. In the Moderna vaccine, again, 28 days apart, approved for 18 and older. This may change. And the Johnson & Johnson, 18 and older, 1 shot. And this is actually, this phrase, when are you fully vaccinated, is kind of poorly worded. What I'd say, at what point are you at least partially protected from infection? And the answer is, well, in this one, it will be 1 week after the first vaccine. Here, about 1 week, 10 days after the first vaccine, and 2 weeks after your second shot. That's fully vaccinated. And in the Johnson & Johnson, they say 2 weeks after your shot. This is relevant in international travel because they are interested in when you got your vaccine. Have you completed your full series of vaccinations? And they'll want to see proof if possible. So I mentioned the pain that we saw. Pain, redness, swelling. In my little family unit, we saw 3 of these. Muscle pain, yeah, we had no chills or fever. Other people have. Not seeing nausea. Headache, feeling tired. Marianne stayed in bed for a day. That was it. And we do not know why women report worse side effects. It may be a X chromosome related thing with immune response. We do think that in some cases, women have a better immune response. And again, we don't know, we just have seen it, but it's nothing that should be a game changer that should say, please don't get your vaccine. This is what I was alluding to earlier. And don't try to read these except to say is, this is looking, how long will your antibody last after the second dose of a vaccine? In this case, this is the Moderna vaccine. And sorry, the line here is where we consider you protected. And so what we see is, we can see that the protection drops a bit over 6 months, but you're way over the threshold for what we consider to be protection into 6 months, and I would venture to guess that this would last the better part of a year. In this respect, it's very similar to what we see with flu vaccine. Now, these three graphs, again, the first one is looking at how well does it prevent the virus from attaching to your cells. And in the third one, number C, they're saying, if we incubate your virus with your antiserum, your blood, can it infect cells? And the answer is no. It's 10 to the 3 means you can dilute your blood 100-fold and it will still prevent the virus from infecting. Vaccine passports are something that are coming and are very controversial. There have been lots of people who said, no way in hell I'm going to get a vaccine. You're not going to fool with my body. And this gets into the anti-vaxxers that are out there. And we certainly cannot force people to get vaccine, but we can put regulations in place where people need to be vaccinated, much as we insist on children being vaccinated for measles, mumps, or rubella before they can come to school. There are some places that are going to insist that you're vaccinated prior to your being allowed to do certain activities. The problem with this card is, and I have one, I don't have my passport here with me because I'm taking it with me because it's going to get me into Ecuador on Friday, is this card could easily be forged. What it has on it is it has the name of the vaccine, where it was administered, the date it was administered. This would be dose 1, this would be dose 2, and the facility it was administered in. And if someone really wanted to check backwards to see if it was done, yeah, they could call Kettering Health, Miami Valley Hospital, Premier Health, whatever, and say, could you please confirm that this person got vaccine? And they might get that information, but that's not happening. I don't think that's going to happen in the near future. Now, over here, we can see that on NPR on the 8th, a California man was arrested in a suspected fake COVID-19 vaccine card operation. He printed up lots of these cards and filled them in and sold them to people. To which I would say, why? Just get the darn vaccine. So it's kind of silly, but it's happening. And I think in this country, we're going to have to come up with a more confirmable, reliable system for recording vaccination. And we used to have this for smallpox vaccine, but that yellow thing I have in my archives is long out of date. We also have yellow fever vaccinations. There are a lot of ways of doing it, but we just haven't started doing it yet. Other countries have attempted to do the same thing. And this is showing you a Chinese vaccination certificate. It's showing you an Indian vaccination certificate, which has Prime Minister Modi on the bottom, and then from a Spanish vaccination certificate. But the problem that we get into, again, is these could be easily forged. And in that case, it defeats the purpose of trying to use vaccination as a method of identifying people at lower risk of bringing virus into a facility or into a country or anything like that. Now, an interesting thing is, it's called the Green Passport. And this has been developed by Israel. It is an online application and showing you the happy family wearing their masks, going wherever, vacation. And what it does in Israel is it allows you to get an indoor table in a restaurant. You don't have to be out in the outdoors with a big fan on you with masks on. In Israel, they don't allow you to go into a sports venue or a concert without rigorous testing. But here, if you have a green pass, you can get into a concert or sports game. So again, it allows you to enter many businesses. You can go to swimming pools, gyms, theaters, wedding halls, cultural events, such as concerts, sports games. And what we're dealing with, at least from the standpoint of Beth Abraham, is religious gatherings. We've been very frightened of having people come to Shabbat services where they're sitting next to each other with no masks. So we have, at least at Beth Abraham, we've limited the attendance at services to a very small number. Everybody's masked and everybody's sitting 6 to 10 feet apart. So you have 20 people. Well, we're now dealing with what are we going to do about the high holy days when we have several hundred people coming to shul? So it would be nice if we had something like this. We won't. But again, understanding the status of the people that are coming in helps you really determine the risk. And again, over here, you can see having the pass may also mean you may not have to quarantine for 10 to 14 days after international travel. Yeah, we haven't gotten there in this country yet. But commenting a little bit about this, my own personal experience is that I went to the Maldives in April and I needed a negative PCR before I went, and they didn't care about my vaccination status. And that PCR needed to be done within 72 or 96 hours of my first flight out of the country, which was from Dayton. I'm leaving for Ecuador in, let me look at my watch, 48 hours. And Ecuador has changed it that you must have a negative PCR within 72 hours or show your vaccine card that you've been vaccinated fully, and then you can enter Ecuador, which sounds great, makes it much easier. But then the Galapagos are a bunch of islands and they have additional rules. They say, that's nice that you got into Ecuador with your vaccine card, but we want a negative PCR within 96 hours of landing in the Galapagos, which means you've got to do lots of calculations insofar as time zone changes, when you get the vaccine, when you're going to get the result back. And luckily, at least in Dayton, you can get them back pretty quickly. I had my PCR done yesterday at 4:05 p.m. and my result came in my chart at about 9:30 this morning saying, thank goodness, I don't have COVID. I didn't expect it, but now I have that to take with me as well. And I think that international travel will be the same. Hawaii is very rigorous, as I mentioned earlier. You need to have a negative PCR or you need to quarantine for 14 days, which is a pain. The New York rules, which I alluded to earlier, were again a negative PCR and quarantine. But now I think it's opened up, and I think with the vaccination rolling along, it'll be much easier. So this is the question we had for this discussion. Now that you've been fully vaccinated, what can you start to do? So I'll go by the official rules and then what we're doing. So number one, you can gather indoors with fully vaccinated people without wearing a mask or staying 6 feet apart. We went camping with good friends, both of whom were vaccinated, and who, in fact, both of whom were on the Pfizer study. You can gather in, this is CDC, by the way. You can gather indoors with unvaccinated people of any age from one other household. So you have relatives without masks or staying 6 feet apart, unless they have an increased risk of severe illness from COVID-19. So small gatherings are probably okay without going crazy. I think that, again, the lack of masks is in low risk situations. So you can gather outdoors or conduct activities without wearing masks, except in certain crowded settings and venues. So what about us? We have been hiking with no masks. We've been bicycle riding with no masks. I've been scuba diving with a different type of mask, but when we got on our boat in the Maldives, for a couple of days, we wore masks because they wanted to be careful, but everybody was PCR negative. And then that died off in about 2 days. But the second we left the boat and went back onto the islands, there was a rule that you must wear a mask irrespective of your status, or there was a $70 fine if they found you walking around with no mask. So lots of countries are being pretty serious about this. If you're in a crowded setting, be careful. Mostly, I would say avoid it. So when Marianne and I drove up to a restaurant, we saw that the parking lot was full. We kept driving. The restaurants we have gone to have been ones in which there's still some distancing between tables and in which the wait staff have been wearing masks. And we've been feeling very comfortable in that respect. Just some local restaurants that we've had this experience with, the Winds in Yellow Springs, Meadowlark on Far Hills, And in Englewood, Tony's Pizza and Italian food, where mostly they were doing takeout, and we were the only ones there, and the server wore a mask. So I think that eating out is fine within reason. It's saying if you travel in the US, you do not need to get tested before or after travel or self-quarantine after travel. And I mentioned here the New York rules were abolished. I don't think Hawaii is quite there yet. So there are certain places there may be some rules in place, but I think as vaccination penetrance, meaning the number of people with vaccine increases, this will go away. International travel is crazy. What I can say is go to the US State Department site and read what they say about that country. Go onto the international site itself and read what they say about it. It says here, you do not need to get tested before leaving the US unless your destination requires it. Well, that's a stupid statement because everywhere I've looked at going to requires it. The interesting thing is they want us to show a negative test before boarding an international flight back to the US. The US does not care about your vaccination status. And my experience coming back into the US from the Maldives was I got one of my, welcome back to the US, have a nice day. No one asked me if my PCR, my test was negative, though I carried the printed copy of my negative test, which was done on a boat and given to me before I flew, with me. They are also saying that home tests are accepted. A home test means they give you this kit. You do it at home and you send it off or do something like that. But the bottom line is these tests need to be done under telemedicine observation, meaning your doctor's like, I'm your doctor right now and I'm watching you on TV, swabbing your nose, putting it in, sealing it, and doing all that stuff. It's totally impractical. That's not going to happen. But we do need a negative test coming back. This means a negative antigen test or a negative PCR. The PCR looking for genetic material is much more sensitive and is the gold standard in virtually all countries, but the US insists on any test that you want. It says here you should still get tested 3 to 5 days after international travel. I'm sorry, I didn't do it last time and I'm not doing it this time. I'm vaccinated, I'm wearing a mask. Everybody on the plane's wearing a mask. All the staff are wearing masks. In fact, when I flew to the Maldives, I was on Qatar Airlines and the cabin crew was wearing bibs, gowns, face shields, and masks and gloves. You know, and everybody on the plane was wearing a mask. So I really think it's a low risk issue. And they're saying you don't need to self-quarantine after arriving in the US. So this is inconsistent. Why should you get tested and not self-quarantine? When I'm picking my international destinations right now, I'm looking at what the rules are. As an example, we have a timeshare in the Cayman Islands, which we have not been able to go to for almost 2 years. The rules in the Cayman Islands, as of today, I believe, are if you come there, that's fine, but you're quarantined for 14 days before you're allowed out, no matter what. So my answer is, I'm not going. If I have to quarantine someplace where I'm just going for a vacation, it's not worth going. I'll pick another location. Okay, so what should you keep doing? I am still doing this in public. Where is it? There it is. Okay. I don't think I need to protect people in this talk from me by this mask, but when I go into public or crowded places, I am wearing a mask for 2 reasons. Well, the major reason is an example, because there are people out there that aren't vaccinated that may be spreading the virus asymptomatically. And I really think that we should encourage people to wear masks in public until no one needs to wear it. So even though we're vaccinated, we're not going to go, oh, we're vaccinated, we're cool, we can't infect you. Wear your mask, don't argue about it. I would not go to a large indoor gathering. And again, if you travel, you will still be required to wear a mask on planes. I was told by David Schuster about 2 hours ago in an email that he was on a plane and a cabin attendant was not wearing a mask, which really shocks me because I just flew Delta last week. And Delta, they tell you, you wear a mask or we can take you off the plane. Everybody that was on that plane was wearing a mask. All the attendants were wearing a mask. They give you snacks, they're wearing gloves. but there are federal regulations for all interstate transport. They want you to be wearing masks. And this is a rule, and there are fines if you don't do that. So for now, let's keep doing it until this is gone or it's at a low level, but it's going to be a while. I would not expect that the mask mandate will be lifted for a couple of months more. Okay, so the final part of this is, what about those nasty variants you keep hearing about? The Brazilian variant, P1, the English variant, and especially the South African variant. You know, the RNA viruses like the coronavirus, the COVID virus, have a very high mutation rate. They have accidents in the copying, and these mutations can either change how the virus looks or can be fatal to the virus, so it dies. But obviously, if it's a fatal mutation to the virus, you can't transmit it because it's gone. But there are some that make the virus a little bit more aggressive, some that make it stick to your cells a little bit better, and in some cases, some that make you a bit sicker or escape the antibodies we made to the first. So there's been great concern that, what about the South African virus? I'm vaccinated. Should I worry excessively about getting infected by the South African virus when I'm traveling? Well, first of all, the number of cases we've had has been relatively low. The UK variant, we've had, this is not current data, over 20,000 cases. The South African virus, which is more aggressive, and the Brazilian, under 500. And you can see here, if you look at these cities, these are cities with mostly with international airports, if you think about it. Philadelphia, Detroit, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Denver, all the California airports, Miami, certainly Atlanta, not sure why Tennessee is there, the Boston airports, and so forth. So these are places where these viruses come in, and we've seen in the past other viruses sort of foothold by coming into these places. Studies were just recently done that looked at, if you've been vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna or the Johnson & Johnson, how good is the vaccination against the original virus? And you can see here, 95%, 94%. And we look at the UK variant, same efficacy, meaning no difference. Against the South African variant, the antibody levels are there, but you have so much antibody in you that it still protects you very effectively against the South African variant, and the Brazilian is about the same. In the case of some of the virus vaccines we do not have here, we have the Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and Sinovac, a little bit of reduced ability to protect you. It probably will protect you from severe illness and death, but you might get sick. So right now, I think that there is no great concern that the vaccines we have right now need to be changed this week. But I think that, as this, I think, final slide, a booster shot may be necessary next year, which is not shocking, because if you think about flu shots are repeated every year because the flu virus changes from year to year. As long as we have extensive spread of COVID from person to person, we will get mutations. We will get the changes in the virus that make our immunity a little bit less. And so we will probably need boosters next year. And Marianne and I are trying to get on a trial, but they're not out there yet. The Moderna vaccine has been tweaked for the new variants, and they've been given as a booster vaccine, and it looks pretty good in trials. And so the new Moderna vaccine is safe and may go against the B1, this is the UK variant, and against the Brazilian variant there. So I think we should expect that, even though we were vaccinated right now, next year, if there's new virus circulating, we'll get a booster shot. A final comment about booster shots is, what if you've had COVID? Should you get vaccinated? And I've had 2 colleagues at the VA, physicians, who've had COVID, and they've both gotten their booster shots when it was more available. And the reason that we do this is that, yes, you have pretty good immunity after natural infection, And then when we give you a booster, it goes up 100 to 1,000-fold. So you are really, really, really protected. So I would just say anybody who has had COVID, please get at least one shot of one of these vaccines, and it will protect you a heck of a lot better for next year. And now, okay, so this is showing you we're not wearing masks. We're hiking outdoors, and we're in West Virginia. No, this is West Virginia, hiking around, and we have not gotten COVID, and the vaccine didn't turn us into turnips. So I think at this point, Tara, we can turn things open.
Absolutely. And Dr. Bernstein, if you stop sharing, I'll be able to see everybody better to call on for questions.
I just did that. Okay.
Fabulous.
And I see some of the questions here. So from Mike Goldstein, I think I talked about that. Why do Mike and I need to wear masks and keep 6 feet apart? The answer is we are pretty protected, but the people that we're going near don't know that we're protected and have the vaccine, because we're not going to get into walking around with a big V on our chests. I think there's been bad precedent for wearing letters on your clothing, and in many places it may get you into confrontations with people. So best not to, and I think it's more of an example. From David, mask removal during meals on flights. He asked me this before. Yes, I nurse my drink on flights. So as long as I have an open cup of whatever I'm drinking in front of me, I keep my mask off. And then when I'm done with it, I put it back on. I don't try to do this. Take a sip, put the mask back on, take a sip, put the mask back on. And I have not personally encountered cabin attendants who've bugged me about that. There may be some places where they will. From Jim, the Indian virus is not a new variant. It's not more dangerous. It's just you got 1 billion people living 3 inches from each other, and it's spreading like crazy, and there's no vaccine penetration. And it's just going crazy, but it's not a new, there's no Indian variant that I'm aware of right now. Okay, from Alan, if Pfizer vaccinated, but the upcoming booster is Moderna, is that acceptable? It's preferable to get the same one, but the answer is absolutely, Alan. It came out, I think, from CDC or elsewhere, that if you only can get a second booster from a different vaccine, just do it. Remember that the genetic material or the coding for the vaccine is the same for pretty much all the viruses. It's the antigen on the surface of the virus that attaches to your cells. And that's pretty much the same. So if you get a vaccine that's not the same, you'll probably still get a boost against it and it'll be better. So yes, do it if you have to.
Are there additional questions in the chat? And if not, people can either raise their hand in front of the camera or raise their hand using the reaction tools, and we can call on you for questions. Harriet, do you have a question? Harriet, we need you to unmute. There you go.
Okay. No, I don't feel safe when people are wearing their mask improperly. And I tend to say things, and I've been told I'm going to get knocked down or punched out. But when your nose is sticking out of your mask, to me, you're unmasked.
Harriet, you are absolutely unequivocally correct. And when Marion and I missed our connection in Atlanta for our flight from Florida back to, from Florida back to Dayton, and we were dealing with the attendant at the thing, because she couldn't hear me, I went like this, and she said, "Put your mask back on, sir, please." And I went, "Oh, okay, fine, thanks." So you're absolutely correct. Wearing masks like this is not effective. Wearing masks like this is definitely not effective. This is called a kippah, not a mask. And so, that doesn't do any, and I've seen this a lot. I think it's very interesting. I see these guys with bushy beards out to about here, and they got this fluff and they got the mask over it. And I just, what can I say? In an operating room, that wouldn't be acceptable, but it's what we can do. But you're right. We should have it relatively tight around the nose. This mask was made by my wife back in her mask making days, and it's got a little metal strip. And so it can be pushed around the nose. So you can see there it's holding on, and then it's a moderately good seal. it has been said that if you're really worried or you're susceptible or at risk, you can wear 2 masks. And the 2 masks are, you can wear the standard disposable one and a cloth one. And the protective efficiency relates to the number of layers that you're breathing through. 1 layer is not very good, 2 layers are good, 3 or more layers are even better. Now, some people have used what are called N95 masks, and these fit really tightly. People with any beard at all can't wear them, and they seal to your face. They're a bit better, but they're, for most of us, they're not really necessary. Now, what about those things that the people go like this, excuse me, you know, with the mask that they pull up like that? Well, they're accepted. I don't think they're very good, but I've seen people doing it. They have the scarf thing around their neck and they pull it up. And again, I just move 6 feet away. And Harriet, I don't get into arguments with people because there are lots of people who feel strongly about that. I had a patient in the office yesterday, and the patient was a young man with traumatic brain in my infectious disease clinic. And I said, he needs the vaccine, but his mother was with him. And she says, no way in hell am I getting that vaccine. And all I say is, ma'am, it's your privilege, but he must get vaccinated. And she said, okay. And that's as much as we're going to do.
And I understand, Harriet, your anxiety. I think a lot of people feel that. And like Dr. Bernstein said, you know, if you want to double mask so you feel more secure if you're in that situation, or, you know, just avoid, get 6 feet away. It's a tough position to be in.
I do. I make it obvious that they're in my way, giving me something. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So
David Schuster has a question. How long does it take for the PCR to become positive after exposure? As a virologist, I will tell you that I would expect it to be more than 48 hours, probably 72 to 96 hours. That's the point at which you're asymptomatically shedding. The time to positivity for symptoms is usually 4 to 5 days. So I would say not 24 hours, but 48 to 72 hours out, it'll probably go positive. So, you know, that's about it. But the PCR is the gold standard, and, you know, that's where we are.
thank you. Lorraine, if you want to unmute yourself, we can get your question.
We'll do that because while I've been typing them in the chat here, it's like, this is just easier. So I have a couple of questions. The first one, not entirely facetiously. So if side effects indicate that the immune system is working and I didn't have any side effects from mine, should I be concerned that I didn't get?
Absolutely not. Okay, absolutely not. And so, as I said, that the people that we went to West Virginia with were also in the Pfizer trial. We had 2 women and 2 men. Of the 2 women, one had symptoms, that's Marianne, and one, our friend Lisa, had no symptoms at all. Her husband and I both got vaccinated later on since we'd gotten placebo, and neither of us had any significant symptoms. In the papers that were published, I say 2/3 of people have no symptoms at all. So, and and there's no relationship whatsoever about the symptoms and your antibody and protective efficiency. So the answer is don't be worried. It's probably fine.
Cool. So speaking of the antibodies, so I don't know if there's still, like, for a while, the blood center and people were looking for antibodies to use as treatments for people.
That's okay. Convalescent serum is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that horse is long gone. That horse died.
Okay.
We're not doing it anymore. It's not been found to be very efficacious. Now, there are monoclonal antibody treatments that are out there. It is approved before you get sick as an outpatient. We're not really doing it inpatient. There are only 2 or 3 drugs that we're using inpatient, and one of them is an antiviral called remdesivir. We're also using steroids, corticosteroids, Decadron, in the hospital when you're seriously ill, and maybe a little bit else, but everything else is gone. Malaria medicines are gone. This is gone. Azithromycin is gone. That was what we were struggling in the beginning, but now we have a heck of a lot more data, and that's where we are.
Okay, because the other part was going to be whether the antibodies we create from the vaccine would qualify, but since nobody wants to do that anymore anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I can't answer your question. Theoretically, if we could purify it, sure. But I think we have monoclonal antibodies which do work, and so they can produce those in factories, and we don't need to bleed people.
That's a nice thing. And the other question that's kind of the anti-vaxxer, and I have had my shots, but the anti-vaxxer sort of question of this is if you you know, the RNA stuff is going in and causing cells to produce the antibodies and produce things. Do we know if they might be producing something else or causing other cells to react in interesting ways?
Okay, so the simple act, there's several parts to that question. Number
Yeah.
one, the mRNA is only in your body for a couple of days and then it degrades, which is the body normally breaks down mRNA. So it's gone after a couple of days. That's number one. Number two, it's making a specific protein, again, which the virus has, and that's what you're developing your antibodies to. Now, let's talk about blood clots. Why are we getting blood clots? In some people with genetic dispositions, 1 in a million, it may be that getting exposed to this protein from the virus makes you react to your blood cells differently. It's very, 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 very rare. We may see more strange things like this as time goes on. But again, we're talking 1 in a million. If you think about some of the flu shots, we had something called Guillain-Barré that was out there. And that happens also. And so no vaccine is completely without risk, but we talk about risk benefit. And if your risk of dying of COVID is this big, and your risk of getting a fatal blood clot is 1 in 10 million, well, you know, I would do it. I have done it.
You've done it, yeah. Cool, I'm done.
Thank,
Thank
you.
you.
Mike Goldstein has been waiting patiently in the wings. If you want to unmute yourself.
I do. Jack, I want to get back to the question of vaccinated people and the risks that they may have of contracting anything, because I heard your guidance for vaccinated people to still avoid, for example, continue to avoid large gatherings. But why do vaccinated people who presumably are immune need to avoid a large space? Now,
Right, so
unvaccinated
I
people,
will say two answers. Number one, the vaccine is 95% efficacious. That means you have a 1 in 20 chance of getting infected. So there's still a slight chance you can get infected. It's not 100%. It's like life. Nothing is 100%.
right.
And the second thing is, again, this example for other people. I'm not worried about you and me as much if we take reasonable precautions. So if you wear a mask and you go out there and avoid really crowded situations, you're now at 100% as far as I'm concerned. You're not going to have any problems. But I think it's just a little bit that we're worried about. And especially if you look at the fatality rates of COVID, the rate in 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, when you got to the 80-year-olds, when you got to nursing homes, it was nutso, and you know that.
Right.
Nursing homes, everybody was shut out of nursing homes for months. And so I think that the issue there is that the older people are at higher risk. Maybe they're 80% protected, but if they get it, they're dead. So that's where we're coming from, Mike. I think I think the phrase is an abundance of caution. It may not be necessary, but an abundance of caution. So I'd like to stay away from crowded situations. And parenthetically, Marianne and I are going to a Dragons game tonight, the first time in 2 years. And I'll tell you what it's like at the stadium later. But I think we're going to be spread out and wearing masks and everything else when we're there. And we'll be in the fresh air as well. So I think being careful, you can do things.
Okay, thanks, Jack.
Thank you. We do have another question in the chat box from Stacy. Is there any truth to the fear of adverse effects of oxygen quality from breathing through the layers of a mask and breathing back in carbon dioxide?
No, no, not at all. Okay, so carbon dioxide diffuses extremely rapidly through the mask. Unless you're wearing a plastic mask which doesn't breathe, there is no chance you're going to get increased CO2 through that. We have medical masks that we use in the hospital where we allow you to breathe back a little bit of CO2. But these masks, there's no way. There's too much leakage. There's no way. You're still going to get essentially 21% oxygen, which is the normal oxygen in the air we breathe, and your carbon dioxide should be very low. No, I've not seen that reported medically anywhere at all. It's one of the many rumors that's going around.
I was going to say that's debunking the people who don't want to wear a mask and one of the excuses that you hear. Yeah. Were there any other questions? All right, can we have a round of applause? It can be your reaction button. It could be a clap in your square. It could be jazz hands, whatever it looks like your applause for you, for Dr. Bernstein. This was a great presentation. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. Very informative on how the vaccines work. I love the jazz hands, how the vaccines work, and what we can expect and think about for ourselves as we start to take those baby steps out into the world. I want another round of applause, either your reaction button, clapping, jazz hands for our JFS program committee, Mary Ann Bernstein and Aline Gordon at the helm. They plan lots of great programming for JFS. It's all free, and we have some great programming on the horizon. I know we're running a little late. We will include that when we send you a thank you for participating, because we appreciate everybody being here today. So we have some great programming that's attached to COVID, coming out of COVID coming up, as well as some head, shoulders, knees, and toes. We have a dermatologist coming to speak, as well as proper shoe fit on our posture and well-being. So we'll send you all those details. And last thank you is JFS staff, Mindy Adams. I was gonna say she's right there, but all of our screens are different. To me, she's on my left and Aleka's on my right. So without them, these things do not happen. And a big thank you again to Dr. Bernstein and everybody being with us today.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. And Mindy, we can stop the recording.